This is Greg Gust with the National Weather Service in Grand Forks with the Spring Flood Outlook here on the 10th of March 2022. Just going over the conditions quickly, bottom line up front, the risk for significant flooding remains higher than historic. There have just been a few tweaks since the early and mid-February outlooks. Generally, you're still looking at moderate to low-end major flooding as the main threat for most of the area, with just some pockets of minor flooding in the uplands. The dry or drought conditions that extended through most of 2021 are much improved due to the late fall precipitation and, of course, the overlying snowpack now. There is the possibility, certainly with a gentle thaw, that we could see some more soil absorption this year because the overall soil conditions, at least from reports from most of our watershed managers and field operatives, there's still a fair bit of soil absorption capability out there. So we are currently not as saturated as some of the high flood years like 2009, 2010, 2011. In these cases, the soil moisture and base stream flows are very near normal for this time of the year. The snowpack and snow water content, however, is generally above normal. We are expecting a sharp cool down this week, and with that, then we'll see a little bit of light snow across the area. But generally the trends from the weekend into the early part of next week would be near to above normal temperatures, and then generally a track toward near normal temperatures as we get into late March and early April. The March, April, May climate outlooks in general suggest equal chances for below normal or above normal temperatures and precipitation. In other words, there's no strong signal with either La Nina or El Nino or those that are in play at this point in the season. So looking at flood risk by category, these are the dots, the colored dots, of course, indicating a large tendency for moderate to low-end major flood staging throughout the Red River Basin, and certainly closest to the main stem red and the counties just on the areas that border the red having the highest risk. A little bit lesser risk as you move into northwest Minnesota, northeast North Dakota, away from the main stem red in general. So the upper tributaries, not as much threat. As you get into southeast North Dakota, you'll see there's a little bit more red showing up into there, so a little higher snowpack and runoff potential throughout that area. In general, near and along the main stem Red River, we expect to see rural flooding outside of the levees. There could be traffic issues, both with the possibility for flood walls. Flood walls could be set up in Fargo-Moorhead as well as Grand Forks, East Grand Forks. We are not stating that's going to occur, but the forecast is for conditions that might warrant that occurring as we get into the runoff season. Highway 75, likely with these type of high water levels, could have some trouble spots along it. I-29 south of Fargo, not necessarily, but that could be a problem area. And then also, again, as you get north of Oslo toward Drayton, there's a few trouble spots that could develop there. I bring up the Oslo Island potential, and that is at the levels of runoff we're looking at in this outlook. There's the possibility that the roads coming in from North Dakota and from Minnesota on the east into Oslo could get cut off with floodwaters, so that's a possibility this year. The Drought Monitor looks at the conditions on the landscape, and we update that on a weekly basis. And just to show you again, back from late summer where we were at the height of our drought here across eastern North Dakota, northwest Minnesota, in the extreme and exceptional drought categories across a large part of the area. But since then, the late August into September into October, rainfall throughout helped to assuage that drought condition quite a bit. And then, of course, the increasing snowpack on top. We pretty much removed all of eastern North Dakota and most of northwest and west central Minnesota from the Drought Monitor. A little lingering areas there over the Red Lakes, Lake of the Woods area. So overall, the fall-winter precipitation has been above normal across our entire drainage area, 2, 3, 4, pushing 5 inches above normal total precipitation. A lot of that was in those fall months, falling as rain, which again was falling into an area that was much drier than normal, so that was good for the soil going into freeze up. A little bit carried over into the snowpack, so that we're also getting above normal snow water and snowpack. And looking at the soil moisture that is underlying that snow, we can see that we have just a little bit, this is the anomaly now, just in millimeters showing there, but that's just roughly a little less than an inch above normal moisture in the soil in that top 3 feet of soil in the far southeastern part of North Dakota, west central Minnesota, so that far southern part of the basin, and then a little bit drier than normal still showing up in northwest Minnesota. Stream flows going into freeze up because of the rainfall last fall was able to bring most of the rivers up near normal levels going into freeze up, and they pretty much stayed there throughout this winter season. Not much breaking loose yet, so we aren't getting true runoff and flow into the rivers yet. There is some snow melting along the creeks and rivers as we warm up, and a little bit of releases coming out of some of the reservoirs, but at this point, no true runoff off the landscape at this point. Frost depths are generally deeper than normal throughout the basin, especially in the northern half of the basin in the U.S. portion. And I've got some indications there at Grand Forks. We're sitting at 37 inches, while as down as Fargo, about 24 inches, and then some areas that are 20 inches or less in the far southern basin, but plenty of areas that are more. So for instance, up at Roseau and Ross area in Roseau County there, 39 inches of frost depth. As you move over toward Langdon and Adams, North Dakota, 59 inches showing up for frost depth. And then a little bit, again, extending even toward Minot and Bismarck, where there's less snowfall, and certainly the cold temperatures have driven down that frost deeply into landscape. That didn't have much snow cover at all. So that's going, the initial conditions going into your fall moisture, base stream flow, and frost depth. And I will look a little bit more at the snowpack we have. In that snowpack here, as of yesterday, there's the analysis showing up. Again, a mixture of surface observations, aircraft observations, and satellite measurements. And you can see that with the windy conditions, the blizzard conditions, the high wind conditions, a lot of that snowpack has moved around a little bit. So there's some areas with lesser snowpack showing up and more snowpack where the snow has lingered. But snowfall that occurred has blown off some of the fields, so you're seeing some areas where there's even patchy bare ground. Well, most of that snow is still around, some of it into the shelter belts. Most of it just is moving into different areas as we get the high wind conditions moving across. But in general, 8 to 24 inches of snowpack still lingering on the landscape. Grand Forks and Fargo both currently measuring 8 inches. Up in Breckenridge points still showing up in the upper teens for snowpack, snow cover. Much of this again is compressed and ripened and refrozen. As you get up into far northwest Minnesota, far northeast North Dakota, especially the uplands there, Langdon into Cavalier County, where there's still a pretty thick snowpack into those areas. And the snow water content in general accompanies that. So you see higher snow water content down in the far southern basin and up into far northeast and northeast North Dakota, northwest Minnesota. Again, roughly 2, 3, 4, 5 inches across the area. A few reports coming in at 6 inches of snow water content. Some areas showing less than 2, but that's again where snow has moved off the landscape and moved into shelter belts or just readjusted and blown into other areas. Still a fair amount of water content there. And this is how the River Forecast Center is modeling that. So that left side graphic is what is the ranking relative to historic conditions. So you'll see that most of our snow water equivalent that's showing up there is in the 70th to 80th to the 90th percentile. So the upper quartile, if you will, for statistical purposes. And then the actual water content in there on the right-hand graphic is showing up at 3 to 4, pushing 5 inches of snow water content over most of the basins here, especially in that east central and southeast North Dakota area. So with that, the things that can change now over the next few weeks is we still can see frost depths change in response to colder or warmer conditions. And if we get snow melting, we can actually get cold weather that comes in and pushes the frost depth even further down at some point. We can still get additional winter snowpack and snow water content on here, and we'll talk about that here now. So looking over the next 7 days, we're expecting some light snow conditions through the next week. And with that, from Fargo and points south, maybe 1/10 of an inch or less of overall moisture added into the system with that. But as you get north from Fargo, moving up toward the Canadian border, you could get 1/4 of an inch or more of moisture content into snow, and that could occur tonight as well as Sunday or into Monday again as weak systems track through the area, and we could get a few more inches of snow. And that's just over the next 7 days. So here's a loop showing from today through Saturday morning and showing a fast-moving system, a clipper system, if you will, that's moving in and just brushing through mainly northern reaches. So we're expecting it to move into the Devil's Lake Basin here 5, 6, 7 o'clock this evening, and you could see some snow showers and increasing winds with that. And then as it moves into northwest Minnesota later this evening into the overnight, again, light snow and increasing winds, so there's going to be blowing and drifting. We could even have a brief period with some snow squall activity in there. So again, light snow, but brief periods of heavier snowfall in there. Generally strong winds, and could be some very strong winds in there at points. So at this point, we're looking at the possibility of a winter weather advisory to accompany some of that. And then there's Friday morning. So the cold front has moved through and is now moving off into northern Minnesota, and we'll still have some pretty strong winds Friday morning with that, and much colder temperatures moving in with that high pressure system behind. But then as we get into Saturday, and this is Saturday morning moving into Saturday evening, we'll have that warm frontal system moving in, and we'll start to warm up and start to even push Sunday and into Monday, some areas starting to see above freezing temperatures. Now with the higher sun angle and temperatures in the upper 20s pushing into the 30s, we're going to see more and more melting occurring, especially on concrete surfaces and in the communities. You don't get that much in the open fields, though. There's still going to be the snow sitting there waiting for a little bit warmer conditions to develop. And the CPC, the Climate Prediction Center, for week 2, and that's looking here for the 3rd week, if you will, into March, is looking at conditions to be somewhat above normal for temperatures, near normal for precipitation. So that should add in that time period where we see above normal temperatures during the day and thawing during the day as temperatures might get above freezing, and then dropping well below freezing at night. So we'll get a little freeze-thaw action occurring. There is, however, the threat that as we get into the last part of March and into early April, that will drop back to more normal. So that'll cool things off a little bit and slow down the overall onset of runoff. And then the general category for March, April, and May, and this is the same outlook that was put out in mid-February. We won't get another one till the end of next week, but that is generally trending us toward near normal for temperatures and precipitation. And here's a look at March and what is normal for Grand Forks and Fargo. Grand Forks on the northern string here and Fargo on the south. And if you look at that green band in there, you'll see that that's the temperatures on the left-hand side, the temperature graphic. The top of that green band is a normal high temperature. The bottom of that green band is a normal low temperature. So for today, you might have a normal high at about 29, 30 degrees in Grand Forks, a normal low sitting at around 10 to 12 degrees. Fargo a little bit warmer. So we're starting to see at this time of the year that Fargo could have a normal high pushing at or above. If you're south of Fargo, at or above freezing, a normal high would be, but the low temperature is still well below. As we get to the end of the month of March, you're going to see where more and more we could be seeing temperatures again pushing up into the 40s. You'll see our record highs have pushed up into the 60s and 70s at both locations. But we could see temperatures pushing up into the 40s during the day, but still dropping below freezing. Now, I'm going to go to a graphic for Fargo that looks at the whole year. And that green dotted line is just showing into that first week of April. So south of Fargo and points south, we could in that first week of April see not only the high temperature getting up into the 40s, pushing toward 50s, but the low temperature could actually start staying near or even above freezing at night. So when we get the low temperature starting to stay above freezing at night for a couple days in a row, that's when we really start to see the runoff develop over the fields, where you start getting enough melting going on that water is going to move off the fields and into ditches and into streams. So normally we'd start to see that somewhere in that early first week of April in the southern basin. It could happen before then, but normal conditions would be for that to occur right around that early part of April, and then that steadily developing and developing northward over time. It would be normal from now until the first week of April for us to get another inch of precipitation in the form of snow generally, but there could be some mixed precipitation in there. So that would be a normal amount. And it would be normal, as I said, at the end of March into early April to start seeing that low temperature staying near or even above freezing on a few days. So here's what normal brings us as we look at Fargo, and that's the probabilistic outlook now for Fargo. Not much changed at all from 2 weeks ago. And that bound, that green band is showing you from the 25th to the 75th percentile, and you're looking at those black triangles, which are the current conditions vetted against those historical conditions showing up at the blue dots. So the current conditions vetted against there give us that probabilistic range that's all showing up in the major flood category, somewhere from the low to middle 30s for feet at Fargo for a flood stage. And then if we were to get no additional precipitation and a very mild and early runoff, we'd still be pushing from the high end moderate to low end major flooding at Fargo. If we were to get delayed cold conditions, delayed runoff, and a much above normal precipitation, we'd be looking at much higher into the major categories at Fargo. Likewise, in that normal range, that 25th to 75th percentile in Grand Forks, that puts us right at that upper end of the moderate flood stage there, and we could be lower or higher depending on how the season progresses, but that's kind of the expected value range in that middle. And again, for both Fargo and for Grand Forks, as I was mentioning, that starts to put pressure on whether or not the flood walls are going to go in. So if we get up to those ranges, city officials will have to look at whether or not flood walls go in, and then that starts to affect traffic flow in and around those communities. So again, this is an outlook that does put that possibility in play. Looking at Devil's Lake, and there is the outlook range 25th to 75th percentiles, showing it to range somewhere between 1450.1 to 1450.9. That is just down a couple of tenths from the outlook that we put out 2 weeks ago, very similar to the one that went out at the beginning of February. But again, that amounts to a couple, 2-3 feet of rise into Devil's Lake. So there's a lot of snowpack that is sitting in the upland areas, a lot of snow water that could come in. And that takes time. It's not going to all come in and melt and come into the lake at once. So again, with normal conditions or even above normal precipitation over the next few months, you have that possibility of seeing a couple 2 to 3 foot rise, 2 to 3, possibly even 4 foot rise in Devil's Lake. So again, that's a fair amount of snowpack. There's going to be some runoff expected in that basin. And here's the outlook in digital format, and this is off the 2-page handout that was sent out. And you can see those values again, the 75th to the 25th percentile, the expected range, if you will, of the outlook here. And right down the middle, if you look at the 50th percentile for the Red River, Wahpeton, all the way up to Pembina, all of those values have just decreased maybe a tenth of an inch or so from 2 weeks ago. We had less than normal snow over the last 2 weeks, so that took a little pressure off of that outlook. Along the Minnesota tributaries, just a little bit of fluctuations that occurred as well. A couple points have gone up, and I won't review all of them, but the Buffalo River, South Fork and North Fork, those have added up a little bit, whereas the Wild Rice River, those are still down a bit, Sand Hill down a bit. Red Lake River at Crookston just up a tad, but not much. And Warren and Alvarado, those are just down a hair. So again, just depending on how that snowpack occurred in the last couple of weeks, or how the snowfall, little bit of fluctuations in there. Also new measurements. We're getting more and more from the watersheds coming in, Two Rivers, Red Lake, and other watersheds that are bringing in additional snow measurements to us. And on the North Dakota tributaries as well. Very little fluctuations. Abercrombie is just up a hair as well. Most of the other locations are down or stable from what they were 2 weeks ago. And PFAS, this is the probabilistic flood outlook summary. There's the web page to get at those, so you can click on any of those points and pull up a little bit more detail for that location as well. And it's going to look in this form. So for instance, here's the Red River at Fargo, and you can look off the right-hand side and see the 2019 and 2020 flood crests in Fargo. Well, you're seeing that 25th to 50th to 75th percentile ranges are just a bit less that came in 2019 and a fair bit more than came in 2020. So that's what kind of compares to those years. And here's at East Grand Forks, and you can see 2019 and 2020 came in within a foot of each other there. And this, the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentiles are coming in just below that at Grand Forks, East Grand Forks. Up at Oslo, same thing. 2019 is not showing up on the PFOS. That's listed on the web page, but that's because it's so close to 2020. We couldn't fit them both on that, but I included it here on the graphic. And you can see that 2019 and 2020, we're expecting it again to come in just below there, that 25th to 75th percentiles. Comes in just above major flood stage and just below those 2019, 2020 flood levels. And there's looking at Pembina. So there's 2019, 2020 again on the right-hand side, and you'll see that now the 25th, 50th percentiles, 75th percentiles are looking a bit more like 2020 than 2019. So bottom line up front, that risk for significant flooding is again overall higher, and I said tweaked just a bit from those early and late February outlooks. Generally moderate to low end major flooding. Soil moisture and base stream flow very near normal, whereas snowpack and snow water content currently above normal. We are expecting that brief cool down in the near term, but then warming up near to above normal for the early part of the coming week, and then trending near normal as we get from late March into early April. A brief cool down now is expected again in that near term, so that's going to put a break on whatever's occurring out there now. Not much thawing going on right now, but there was a little bit with that increased sunshine. March, April, May climate predictions suggest pretty much an equal chance for below normal to above normal temperatures and precipitation as we get through that April and especially into May. So trending, as I said, near normal, but no clear signals. The El Nino, La Nina patterns pretty much have washed out by this point. CRED, I'm going to talk to this very briefly. This is something that we started in 2013 and we've relaunched 2019, 20, and now again in 2022. So you can look on that web page. Do you see that HTTPS? And there's a cred.wq.io. So if you call that up on a web browser on your smartphone, you can get to that and you can bookmark that on your smartphone and use that pretty much as an app. So it operates just as an app. You can identify your location, take a picture, and then select that report, whether you're reporting snowpack or flooding conditions or debris, ice jam, those type of things. So it's free, easy to use, and I would encourage you to pick a spot somewhere in your county, somewhere in your watershed district. If you travel into the rural areas, especially near a creek or a stream or a ditch or a field that might flood regularly, go out there and test it. Take a picture of what the snowpack is now. And then as things start to melt, if you're regularly traveling through there, say once a day on your way to or from work, you could snap a picture and give an update as to how snowpack and snowmelt is occurring in that area. And then we at our office, the River Forecast Center, it's public domain, so anybody can pull up those pictures and see what the status of the snowmelt and flood is near your location. So give it a test. Let us see what's going on around you. And then as far as these probabilistic outlooks, we're done for the year on these. If we get to the latter part of March and we're still deep in snowpack, we might update this. But again, as we start to get into the thaw process, that's the deterministic flood forecast really starts to develop. And if we get into that, so bi-weekly in the latter part of March, we may put out an e-blast memo as to what the thaw and runoff conditions are like. And then as we get water moving and flood forecast develop for those flood forecast points, we'll go into a daily e-blast and webinar process. So if we go into new webinars, we'll send out that link and schedule for you at that time. So there's our office webpage, 795-5127 for the phone number here in Grand Forks, and you can get a hold of Amanda or me, and our email addresses are below. Thank you very much for attending these, and look forward to hearing from you during the flood runoff and flood forecasting process. Thank you.